Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event on the people side of digital transformation. It's so great and amazing to see so many of you here today. This is clearly a topic on everyone's mind in regards to digital transformation, and I really hope we can get to some interesting insights today and answer some of the questions that are keeping you up at night with regards to the people side of digital transformation. I'll be your host today. So my name is Ashleigh Monagle, and I'm a consultant here at Mott MacDonald. And as you can see, this is a partnership between Mott MacDonald and Lane 4. With me are my colleagues, David Plummer and Hannah Collins. And on Lane 4, we have Amy Walters and Tom Smith. And we have a special guest with us as well, which is Neil from Sellafield. Today, what we're going to talk about is the people side of digital transformation. And we're really going to focus on three kind of success criteria that has come out of our research, looking at the commitment that you need to build digital transformation, which is around the urgency and case for change. We'll then look at the capability needed, so what key skills are needed, and we'll do a bit of a deep dive on the white paper that's recently came out from Lane 4. And last but not least, building clarity, so around the communication and the language that is really needed to make this a success at the organisational level, but also appeal to everyone at the individual level. Make sure you stick around to the end because the second half of the session is primarily based off a Q&A. So please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen and vote up if you want those questions answered as quickly as possible. Our expert panel is here for around 30 minutes to answer any of those burning questions you may have. The first question that you might have is, why are we doing a joint event between Mott MacDonald and Lane 4? And it's probably best to start off a bit in terms of our partnership with Lane 4 at Mott MacDonald and how that's progressed in terms of a lovely partnership that's kind of blossomed in terms of key sort of skills and relationships. So I'll hand over to Tom Smith now at Lane 4 to talk a bit more about that. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Ash, and welcome to everybody, and welcome to some of familiar faces and familiar organizations that we've been partnering with for a while. So a little bit about this relationship with Mott's. We've been working with Mott's now for over 6 years. It started off as a leadership development program for high potentials and followed that pretty quickly with a leadership program actually for the top 200 leaders in the organization. And it was in one of those leadership workshops that we started to talk about the possibility of partnering, and partnering in terms of working with our clients. What are the propositions that we have jointly that might be of benefit to our clients? And that's what's led, I think, to a very innovative and very different kind of working together, moving from being a supplier, if you like, now to being partners on different projects. And we're doing that with a very special part of Mott's called MMDV. And my colleague David from Mott will explain a little bit more about how we've moved from leadership development to the space that we're in today and that we're going to be sharing with you.
Great, thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. My name is David Plummer. I head up our digital transformation service line at Mott MacDonald Digital Ventures. So as Tom mentioned there, we've been working together now for the last 6 to 8 months since I've been involved, and the relationship extends a bit longer than that. So there's 3 areas where we brought our complementary skill sets together with Lane 4, which I'd like to mention quickly. One is a piece of work with the Centre for Digital Built Britain, looking at the digital roles and skills needed to support the national digital twin for the built environment. And I think Hannah's going to talk to us a little bit more about that later on. One is the white paper, which Ashleigh and Tom mentioned, looking at the people side of digital transformation. And that's been a big sort of factor in informing this webinar. And Amy's going to cover that off for us. And finally, we've turned the learnings and the lessons from those 2 pieces of work into a joint service offering, which we're calling Digital Leaders, which is effectively a targeted program aiming to build foundational digital skills and behaviors across entire organizations. And hopefully Tom will take us through that a bit later on if we have time. So first things first, let's set the scene for this webinar by answering the question, what do we mean by digital transformation? This could probably be the subject of a webinar in its own right. So we're just going to keep it simple. We see digital transformation as using domain-specific data and technology to generate business value. Okay, so what do we mean by domain-specific? If you were to go to different organizations, say highways, rail, retail, water, pharmaceuticals. It's the technology and data that they use, which is different, that makes it domain specific. So where they're using common data and systems, say, for example, a finance system or commercial data, that's much more likely to fall under traditional IT and not necessarily digital. And then what do we mean by business value? Well, that really varies depending on the organization, but more often than not with infrastructure organizations, it's about efficiency, cost reduction, improved decision-making, new ways of working, and making things easier for end users, all of which digital can play a huge role in delivering. So now we come on to the sort of the challenges around digital transformation and particularly thinking about the people aspects. So why is it so hard and why is the people part so important? So in my experience across different organizations, 9 times out of 10, it's the people element and not the technology that's the most challenging thing to get right for digital transformation. And the reasons for this are actually quite similar to the typical reasons why change and traditional change is such a challenge. And this can be, not having a clear case for change, not having enough focus on the outcomes and the benefits, and not taking the time to, spend the time understanding the impact on end users, roles and skills, most of which I'm sure many of the people on this webinar will have come across at one point or another. But with digital, it seems to be more exaggerated. So why is that? Why is change resistance more exaggerated when it comes to digital? And to be honest, it could be something to do with the speed of technology change. So we only have to look at the technology that we use in our daily lives to see the speed at which things are changing. And there's also with digital, the fear of automation. So I call it the fear of robots, but this idea where people perhaps don't have the understanding of digital, that they could see themselves being replaced or that the value that they provide to their organization being reduced. And finally, in the infrastructure sector, there seems to be this prevailing sort of engineering mindset where I need to be seen as an expert and I need to solve my own problems. So in a lot of cases, digital is rejected because it's this unknown quantity and people aren't comfortable with not understanding how it works. So those are some of the challenges that come to play from a people perspective when it comes to transformation. And we're going to talk about some of the key things that you can do to increase the chance of success in digital transformation. But for now, back to you, Ashleigh.
Thanks, David. And thank you, Tom and David, for setting the scene there and sort of the challenges that are around digital transformation. David, there was something that you mentioned there that I really want to pick up on, which was around sort of the skills and roles that are important. And Amy, I know you've been working on the white paper at Lane 4, and I really want to ask about the key findings within that, because I think that paper is really, really important. So can you tell us a bit more about the research that you've done, the sort of challenges that people have faced, and the sort of crucial skills that have come out of that piece of work?
Yeah, definitely, Ashleigh. So firstly, just to introduce myself, my name's Amy Walters and I'm head of research at Lane 4. And it's just super exciting to be here talking about this topic of digital transformation. It's one of the defining issues of our business era, really. No leader can choose to sit this one out. You've got to get involved. Every business has to keep transforming to stay relevant. It's such a sink or swim issue. So I think, firstly, I'm just really curious to hear people's questions as well. So do post them in the Q&A chat, because there's lots that we found in the white paper and the research, which we won't have time to cover. But I can just give a quick sort of tour of the capabilities and the skills, which are really important to get right. So to give a bit of a background to the research we did, it was towards the end of last year, we set the exam question to find out how do you succeed at the people side of digital transformation? Because as David said, this is often it's the people that sort of trip this up more than just investing in the technology. You can invest all you want, but if you don't get the people side right, then it's just never going to embed and you've wasted that investment. So based on this, we went and interviewed leaders within infrastructure who have been pursuing digital transformation for several years. So they had a lot of experience under their belt. And we basically captured all this accumulated wisdom and practical insight, asked them about their regrets, what they do differently, the journey they'd been on, and captured all these tips into the white paper that I think has already been shared and published. And I think, yeah, like we said, 20% of big companies don't succeed in their digital transformation initiatives. And it's because they just underestimate, they see it as an IT or tech change, when actually it's a fundamental shift in your leadership, in the mindsets within the organization, the values, the culture, the behaviors, all of that. It's about far more than just technology. And if we zoom in on sort of just the capabilities aspect of that, one of the things that some of the leaders phrased really nicely was that you can't just equip people with digital skills, you need to equip the whole workforce with skills for digital. And I can just unpick that a bit more. So the digital skills are the technical capabilities that you invest in. So making sure you've got the data scientists you need, the user experience designers, all those key technical roles within your business. But then this isn't just an IT or tech role, you need the whole workforce equipped and skilled. There's skills everyone needs to make digital change successful. And the two ones that kept coming up were around innovation and adaptability. So in terms of innovation, you really need a workforce which is full of what-if thinkers, people who find problems or opportunities where things could constantly be done better. And you want a workforce that's constantly looking for that improvement and exploring new ideas and solutions. You also want to learn fast mindset, not really a fail fast, but you want people innovating around, but based on the right purpose. So it doesn't really matter if it works or it doesn't, but were you trying something for the right reasons? Was your goal sort of in the right direction? And in terms of adaptability, so there were two skills, there was innovation and adaptability. And every person in the organization needs to be able to evolve both in their skills and their thinking so they can keep up with and stay relevant to the context they're in. And it's kind of like at a micro level, what the organization is needing to do, the organization's needing to adapt and stay relevant to the technology, and individuals need to stay relevant, adapt, keep up their skill sets. And there's sort of two parts of adaptability is quite a broad skill. There's like 5 different components to it, but the two that are really crucial for digital transformation are learning and social. So learning, you really need to be able to step outside your comfort zone. You need workers who are great at learning and unlearning things, picking up new habits, new ways of doing things. And you need like social adaptability. So you need people who are great at drawing on the knowledge of other people, because technology, you never get a new software and you sort of go through the user guide and you know how it works. It's only when you start really trying it, practicing it, working with something, using other people's knowledge that you become an expert. So and social learning is just so important for that sort of embedding the change and getting people really skilled and expert in using the technology that you've set out.
Thank you, Amy. I think that was really clear, and a real change in rhetoric from skills, always talking about, you know, stuff that a data science or data engineer would need, and changing it to skills, sort of adaptability, getting prepared for that constant improvement and change. And the thing that you mentioned about being able to unlearn things as well as you become more of a leader and taking on kind of different kind of business skills as well, I think is really, really important. I know we've done sort of some similar work with the Centre for Digital Built Britain. I'm sort of wondering how that matches up. Hannah, it'd be great to get your thoughts on the skills work with the Centre for Digital Built Britain and how that resonates with the white paper.
Sure, thank you, Ashleigh and Amy. Hi everyone, it's good to see so many of you on the call. I recognise a few of the names. For those I don't know, I'm Hannah Collins and I work within the digital transformation team in Mott MacDonald Digital Ventures, and my background is in organisational change. So I really wanted to build on what Amy had said and highlight some of the work we've been doing with Centre for Digital Built Britain over the last few months. I'll specifically look at exactly what roles and skills we need in our industry, which really sets us apart and highlights the differences between other industries also facing digital transformation challenges. And then I'll look at the approaches to building those skills in your organisation, what's effective, and where is a good place to start. And I'd just like to highlight as well, if any questions come to mind, do pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom so that we can get round to them in the 30 minutes where we've got the panel discussion at the end. So a lot of you might have seen the Learning and Work Institute, which published an article about the catastrophic digital skills shortage that we're expecting in the UK. I think a lot of us are aware of this, but it's what can we do in the infrastructure industry, in our industry today, and identify what skills it is that we need to prevent that shortage and that, that catastrophic disaster as it was described in the article. As Ashleigh mentioned, we've been working with the Centre for Digital Built Britain and a range of infrastructure owners and operators to identify exactly what skills are needed today and what skills will future-proof workforces so that they can learn to deal with whatever technology we'll be using in 10 years' time. Because quite frankly, we're not clear about that, but what we can do is prepare ourselves to deal with those unknowns. And the focus on developing skills within people so that they're able to change and be adaptable to new technology as and when it arises is critical. So we spoke to over 50 industry experts and practitioners to gather our data, and this was through interviews and workshops. And we came out with two main themes, and that is data-led decision-making skills are critical. And the second one is the overall level of digital literacy in our industry needs to be higher. So what does that mean? We looked at the skills to make decisions, and at the moment data can be in silos and held within pockets of teams where actually sharing that data across the organisation will lead to better operational outcomes. And in terms of raising the level of digital literacy across the entire enterprise, that's very much to do with the skills for digital piece that Amy mentioned. So making sure that everyone has a general basic understanding of digital tools and how to use them. So that leads me on to the next point around how do we blend these skills together to come up with some beautifully shaped roles within your organisation that make teams and ultimately deliver and build the capability of the organisation, giving you competitive advantage. So one of our findings was this concept of a hybrid role. It's really important for individuals to have a good balance of digital skills and skills for digital. So as we see more and more digital technical people and talent entering our industry day by day, it's really important that those people can communicate effectively with the engineers and vice versa to solve the business problems that we're challenged with. In terms of the approaches, which is the next bit I wanted to focus on, the actual approaches for building those skills today, there's a range of methods. Amy had mentioned training. We've seen national success with the apprenticeship scheme, the UK government apprenticeship scheme. In particular, I'm thinking of the level 6 digital and technology solutions degree. We've had feedback from our infrastructure owners and operators who we interviewed as part of this work with Centre for Digital Built Britain, that having an apprentice in a team actually upskills their immediate colleagues and generally improves the skills transfer in that team. We've also seen successful examples of open innovation models between construction companies and academic institutions and funding bodies. So I see Ashleigh's arrived on screen, and that is my cue for the honour that I have, which is for launching our first poll of this session. So I hope you're all ready, because I'm going to ask you a question. It will pop up on your screen, and if you could just respond, that'd be brilliant, because we can see what every 206 people in this meeting think. And the question is, has your organisation ever digitally benchmarked itself against other organisations? Thanks, everyone. Brilliant. Okay, so I think you can all see that 56% said no and 44% said yes. So that's brilliant. Thank you, Ashleigh.
No problem. Thank you, Hannah. As you were talking there, I think we've sort of had a look at the work that we've done, both in a white paper perspective and also with the Centre for Digital Built Britain. But I suppose what many here on the call are kind of looking for is really that kind of industry voice from a kind of asset owner operator perspective. So I do just have a couple of questions for Neil at Sellafield, if I may. The first, you know, it sometimes can sound quite daunting and quite a lot to do in terms of skills and capability. So from your point of view at Sellafield, Neil, how do you do things around horizon scanning and sort of plan your skills and capability needs?
Thanks, Ashleigh. So just as a quick introduction, yes, so I'm Neil Pickthall, Digital Transformation Lead at Sellafield. So in terms of digital strategy, we've been we've worked and developed our digital strategy over the last couple of years, and from a horizon scanning and sort of looking at mega trends was a big focus at the start a couple of years ago. And we look at emerging research, we look at lots of journal papers, and just to really understand where the industry is heading, and then a key part of that is the relevance for Sellafield. So transitioning that those horizon scanning elements through the research in the journals, and engaging with other peers as well, is been really beneficial. So one of those ways is through the digital transformation task group that we've been a member for a number of years, and just reaching out to those industry owners and operators to understand their thoughts and feelings on horizon scanning and mega trends, and how it's going to impact and the opportunities for the industry moving forward. In terms of workforce and capability planning, we have an enterprise capability plan, and we have a number of enterprise leaders who are responsible for process, people, and technology change across the organisation. So we develop the individual capability plans, which is then a capability plan at an enterprise level. And then from a digital skills perspective, we're now doing an assessment of current state position on skills and gaps, and then looking at interventions like digital academies, data literacy programs, things like that.
I suppose that's quite a lot of there, Neil, and I suppose you said you started to look at research and what's happening at kind of a broader level and kind of making that relevant for Sellafield, like you said. And I suppose that's really focused on the skills and capability needs. And before we get into the second half of the session, outside of sort of skills and capabilities, what do you see are kind of the key challenges for Sellafield if we're talking about people and that kind of side of digital transformation?
Yeah, okay, so just two points on that one. The first one would be, digital transformation is really challenging, but because it's largely about people and changing culture and mindsets, which is really difficult. But there's huge opportunities from digital transformation. So we need to push that and continue to drive for the future state that we all want. And I think the biggest thing for me is the power in collaboration. All organisations are facing similar challenges. Through digital transformation task group, through engagements with other organisations, we are gaining a lot of knowledge and insight around very similar challenges from a people, cultural, and behavioural aspects. And then I think the other part to this is, so we've done we've been part of the Smart Infrastructure Index maturity assessment for the last 3 years, and that really sets the benchmark for where Sellafield was, and actually the areas to focus on from a people side as well as a data and a customer stakeholder aspect as well. And then I think that the final piece and challenge for Sellafield is, how do you create that burning platform when you've got a 100-year mission out to sort of 2120? And one of the key things that we've done around that is proof of concepts, proof of values. So taking some of the future state out of the possible aspects of digital transformation and making it real and understandable to the business, and pushing that in a short timescale way to really upskill the organisation. Because one of the other challenges is the businesses, and some aspects of the businesses in a bit of the unknown territory. You want to create the pull, but you have to sometimes do some of the pushing as well, because they don't fully understand the opportunity through some of the digital transformation concepts.
Thanks, Neil. And a lot of what you said there, focusing on that collaboration aspect, both internally within your organisation and making sure you collaborate, but also externally, and providing that kind of real value from benchmarking. And I think that's kind of a nice segue. And I think David and Tom can kind of contribute on this and kind of outlining in more detail, you know, what are some success criteria that people can kind of engage with in terms of the people side of digital transformation. So I kind of want to hand over to David now. So thank you for that, Neil. And David, just start off by asking you, what are the best ways people can increase the chances of success within digital transformation? Kind of going back to a couple of Neil's challenges there as well.
Sure, thanks, Ashleigh. And thanks, Neil, as well. It's, you know, good segue into this part of the webinar. I think first and foremost, in terms of how you can increase the chance of success when it comes to digital transformation, it's about getting commitment. And this can definitely be a major blocker for organizations. And as Neil sort of mentioned with Sellafield, with the kind of, you know, the 200-year mission, it can be difficult to create a sense of urgency in our industry, in infrastructure, especially where you've got processes that are deeply ingrained and may have been in place for decades. Unlike the private sector, there's no threat of a startup coming along to eat your lunch or steal market share. So how can organizations get that commitment for the need to change without the threat of competition? And as Neil mentioned, around the Smart Infrastructure Index, benchmarking is one way organizations can, if you like, artificially stimulate urgency. So as we've seen with our work using the index to benchmark digital maturity across infrastructure asset owner operators, it can be a really powerful tool for getting that commitment. Because let's face it, nobody wants to come last in the ranking or be below the sector or industry average. And what we've seen over the 2 years that we've run the index is 73% of organizations say they now have an overarching strategy for digital transformation. That's up from just 49% in 2019. 44% people say that they understand their digital skills gap, and that's up from 30%, but obviously still less than half. And as we've mentioned previously earlier in the webinar, skills is a massive problem and a massive blocker for digital transformation. And then finally, 82% say that their organization doesn't systematically assess digital competency. So the commitment is getting there, and people are certainly buying into the need to change at that sort of senior level of an organization, but it's now other factors that are holding it back, such as the skills and competency, which I think Tom is going to come on to talk a little bit more about. And I also just wanted to talk about the poll that we just did. So 56% of people don't think their organization has ever benchmarked themselves digitally. So I'd fully recommend, as an action out of this webinar, going and having a look at that. So we'll post a link to the Smart Infrastructure Index. You can do that from an individual perspective, but also from your, on behalf of your organization, to see where you stack up against sort of others within your sector.
So I kind of hearing the same sort of thread throughout, which is around sort of skills and sort of capability. And I wonder, from what Amy and Hannah and David have said, Tom, if you could speak a little bit more about that and kind of getting that right mix of capability. Well, we know we've talked about sort of different digital and business, but it'd be great to kind of hear your view on that and how we move forward.
Great, thank you. So how about we have another mini poll and see what people think about this issue. So Jack, if we could have the poll up and then make a little bit of sense about this. So question here for you to think about, and let's generate a conversation around that. How confident are you that everyone understands what the right mix of business and digital skills is within your organization? How confident are you? So if you fire away and start rating that question, and then we'll have a bit of a conversation on that one. So of course, I'm reminded when I look at the excellent attendance that we've got today, is that it's not just people from infrastructure. So I'm keen afterwards, perhaps in the Q&A, to see if you are not from an infrastructure business, what are the things that we're talking about that are resonating for you? Because there are lots of parallels. David's just outlined some of the differences, right? But I think that's an important one to think about as we go forward. And clearly the results here give us an indication. Some people may not be sure about it. A small percentage feeling confident. You've obviously started to think about it. Maybe the things that we've been discussing today are just reinforcing that. But what you're representing, and people suggesting that they're not confident about what the right mix is perhaps one of the outcomes of a session like today. One of your next steps is how do you go about finding that out? So let's talk a little bit about the capability piece over here. It's a consistent theme. If it hasn't come through already through either Amy's white paper research or through conversation with Hannah around the CDBB reports and what David's been outlining, the important bit is the mix. There's a mix between digital competencies and business competencies. And to treat them separately isn't a good thing. You have to look at the two of them in combination. And that combination depends on the role, and it depends on the seniority of the people in the organization. And in that regard, it's no different to any other organizational change. So whilst we might be discussing this in terms of what's happening in infrastructure, what is it about the conversation that we're having today that impacts on your business as well? Why some resist the change, and why for some it's an opportunity. What we know is that in those more senior roles, and this is something for you to think about, the skills for digital that we talked about before, things like transformational leadership skills, communication skills are critical. And as both the research that we outlined, the white paper and the CDBB report outlines, and just hearing Neil talk about it for Sellafield, capability is not just the right skill set, it's also the right mindset. Okay? Not just the right skill set, do you have people with the right mindset? And I'm reminded of one of our clients from a few years ago who hired one of the main innovators in music streaming. So they went out to market to find somebody who had already done some digital transformation and brought them into this financial services firm with a view to transforming them digitally. He lasted 1 year in the role. The organizational mindset wasn't right. They weren't ready for him to come on board and bring the changes. So first question for you to think about. Are you set up to bring someone in who can disrupt the way you do things already? Okay. And then after that, success requires close alignment between what is happening in the HR function and what's happening with people responsible for digital transformation. One of the things that we were very keen in this webinar is to make sure that we invited both sets of clients. Those responsible for digital transformation, those responsible for HR learning and development and recruitment. So what is that capability gap that Neil was outlining before? Is that gap, is it developable with some of the programs that have been outlined? Apprenticeship schemes. That's a function of how quickly you want to do it, and do you have enough time? And if you don't have enough time, is it better therefore to recruit, and do you know what it is that you're recruiting against? Okay. So that's about capability. I'd like to talk a little bit now about clarity, and I've got another poll for you to complete to drive our conversation around clarity. So in my organization, everyone, regardless of their role, understands and cares about your digital transformation. Do you agree or disagree with that? So we come from the point of view around organizational change that it's one part of it is about people having the capability to do it, which we've just discovered, but there's a rational engagement. I understand it, I get it that we need to do, but I also care about it. There's something in it for me, and that's at the center of any change. When we talk about it, we refer to it as understand, care, and can about the change that we're undertaking. So I'm interested to see to what extent do people in your organization understand and care about digital transformation as an important agenda. Waiting for all of you to complete. Okay. So almost 3/4 of the organization in disagreeing with that comment, and about 1/4. Again, that may be a function of how far along you are with your agenda in this case. And the difficulties, of course, is when we talk about everyone in the organization, regardless of their role. And straight away, I'm imagining you're thinking about, well, maybe the senior managers get it, or maybe the people involved in the digital transformation driving get it, or maybe somebody in HR who's responsible for recruiting or developing gets it. But if I were to go to everybody in the organization, there are gaps over there. So this is about clarity for us, because what is the compelling story that's engaging everyone in the organization about that transformation? Now, for some, it is that burning platform. That might be the fact that if we don't change, our business might be at risk. But we know in Sellafield, it's a 100-year plan. That may not be the driver. Okay, so if we make an argument based on the burning platform, that might automatically bring in a scarf reaction, a defensive response to people thinking like, I feel threatened by the change. We like to think of it as well as what's the compelling view of the future? What's in it for everyone from a positive point of view? And that involves having conversations with individuals to help them shape that digital future. Because we use digital every day in our day-to-day. Why not in some of our businesses? So think about how inclusive the language that you use is. For example, with one client, the view of change was that it made life easier for everyone in the office, but actually it was harder for the operators in the production line. It could be as simple as that because of the way, how clear the communication being. So are you using the right language in the first place? So how many of us use lean as a term when actually what we mean is simple? When we hear the word efficiency in the context of change, do we think about savings and all the attributions that follow? Why not use the term easier instead? Because that's what it's about. And our old favorite, the old chestnut, are we still using the verb around change to empower when what we actually mean is to trust people to deliver on their goals and their commitments?
Thank you, Tom. I think that was a really nice ending to the first part of the discussion. Really sort of honing in there on the sort of emotive side of digital transformation when you talk about people. And also considering that whilst digital transformation is about an organization, you know, it's really looking at the individual benefits and how we need to build clarity for them on what digital transformation means for these individuals and what they're going to get out of it. I think overall today, you know, we've spoken about the commitment and the urgency and the case for change that is as needed as a kind of starting point for digital transformation to get all these people on board with you and on that journey. And we spoke a little bit about capability. So not just saying some people need to have digital skills and some people need to have business or leadership skills, but that the combination of everyone having both of those types of skills together is really going to make a difference, and ensuring that everyone not just has the right skill set, but also has the right mindset to be adapting and innovating, as Amy also said earlier in the white paper. And yes, definitely, I think the last bit around clarity, language and emotion, and really communicating that on an individual level. I want to turn now to the Q&A. So if you haven't got your questions in yet, please do put them in at the bottom of the screen. I'm trying to have, all the panelists should be coming up now. So I'm just choosing which one to pick on first to answer the question. The top question that we have is around the cliche that we all get told about. So this is from Mark, and it's around people, technology, and processes. And David, I'm going to come to you with this question, if you don't mind. And, you know, Mark's basically saying here, whenever you go to a conference, you see a lot of people talk about technology and process, but not really about people. So it'd be great to get your view on why you think this is and how we can bring more of the people side into it to kind of build that case for the people side of transformation.
Sure. Just check I'm not on mute. Good. I think it's a really good question. And I wonder if it's got something to do with the, I love it. The question's just gone into answers, so I can't see. Okay, great. I wonder if it's got something to do with the people who attend those conferences. And I think this is where it actually comes down to roles and skills. And so when you've got digital engineering or sort of digital development teams, there's a couple of key roles who are in there to effectively interpret the needs of users, so that the kind of people elements, and then relay them to the developers so that they work on the code. So that comes out in a couple of different roles. One is the product owner, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. And then, in traditional IT world, it might be someone like the business relationship manager, and their job is effectively to be that conduit from the end user to the technical teams working on the application or the product or tool, whatever it is. And I think in some ways that's created a little bit, sort of taken the onus off those development teams to think about the people elements. It's almost like, because there's a certain role whose job that is, I as a developer or somebody involved in digital engineering, I don't need to worry about that. There's others who look at that. And I wonder if that's an example of where not having the right mix of digital and sort of less technical, more business skills in every person means that they're not quite focusing on the people elements to the extent that they should.
Thanks, David. That was really great insight. I've got another question that I thought I might direct at Amy, if that's okay, which is more around the social element that you touched on at the start. So the question here, Amy, is from Chloe, and it says, in terms of the social element needed in a business that you touched on and the silos that exist, how would you seek to break down those silos and embed sort of social as a tool to equip employees with digital skills?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the simplest answer I can give is change the goals that you've given people. Because silos develop when everyone has their specific goal and they bring something to the table. Whereas what you want is everyone collaborating to a common goal. And that's what breaks down barriers. So actually, Amy Edmondson did a really fantastic study in emergency care units with nurses. And she found that when nurses all had just their individual goals, their specific thing to look after with the patient, for example, sort of looking after medication, looking after nutrition, monitoring certain things, then they just did that. But actually, if you shifted the goal of those emergency care pods to be actually your goal as a team is to get X number of patients out within this time frame, then all of a sudden people start, the barriers and start breaking down, and people start readjusting their goals, shifting their priorities to fit in other people. So I think fundamentally, if you want to break down silos, you've got to look at what goals you've set people and what you're rewarding them on. And if you can change that to make it a lot more collaborative, you'll go a long way. The other thing that I remember some leaders mentioning that worked really well is setting up these sort of, you want to get these informal communities of practice going. So by communities of practice, I mean people who are very passionate and very expertise in certain areas. And one company in particular would set up these quite formal hackathons to try and throw a problem or a challenge that the business was facing out to the community, and then that could be to their experts globally, and then get people to sort of solve those problems within a 24-hour period. So it's sort of trying to get those networks flourishing within the organization and get people sort of live, and it also helps embed that innovation mindset. It's like, okay, look out for these challenges, solve them together, learn from each other. And there's a few little tricks that you can do to make that happen. But I'd say change the goals so that they're common, and get those hackathons and informal communities of practice up and running.
Thank you, Amy. I think that was a really great answer. And it goes back to what Neil was saying earlier around sort of collaboration within the organisation. We've got another question here that I'd like to aim at Tom. And it's, what argument can we use to convince people that a system implementation by digital transformation is not here to replace them? So going back to thinking about sort of language and people's emotions, and David's comment earlier about kind of robots and automation, Tom, it would be great to hear your view on how you think we can sort of convince people that, you know, digital transformation is a part of their process moving forward and something's not there to replace them.
And just using the word arguments turns it into a bit more, what argument can we use? All of a sudden becomes a little bit more confrontational. So even how we frame the question has an impact on it. And for us, I think the important bit, and we talk about it a lot when we're doing change programs in general, and that's this little mantra that we have: conversations change organizations. It sounds so simple and it's so hard to do. What are the conversations that are having in your organization? Who are they between? And how open are you about those? How open are you about those conversations? And clearly, there's a time when people in more senior roles have more of a view of what the change is, but it's done very often as a project line around change. So it's another gateway that you need to go through when you're going through the transformation in an organization. And if you go back to what I was saying before around the notion of understand, care, can, and engage people in those conversations, have them discuss about what it is about the role that they want to retain, the autonomy that they have, the story that they have about their change, and have those often and not in a transactional way. So for me, it's not a town hall where you have 100 people in the organization and you are emitting information around what's going to happen. You are actually breaking people up into breakout groups. You're having people have conversation. It's okay to talk about the concerns and the fears that they have, and for senior leaders to talk about the concerns that they may have had. But it's the story that emerges from that, which is one around positivity, around opportunity that comes from it, that makes it less threatening for individuals. Conversations change organizations. And if you can get that going, I think you'll give yourself a very good chance of succeeding with the change.
I can add one more thing as well to that, Tom. I think talking about those conversations and surfacing people's fears openly is super important. And just to add in, a lot of the leaders that we spoke to had this belief that it's actually the technology opens the door for more meaningful work. And it seems so obvious that but the work that you'll be doing is so much more interesting, more creative, more innovative. So I think leaders assume that. They assume the new stuff will be more meaningful work. However, people may be very attached to the value that comes from doing the other work. And I think Tom's completely right that you need to make sure that leaders don't have one impression of the change but people are holding on to something else, another aspect of their role that they really value and they think is really important. So I think it's useful to tee up both those groups.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Tom. I've got another question here, which I've heard many times before, and I'll start off by asking Hannah, but I feel a couple of you probably come in here with an answer as well. So the question is more of a sort of chicken or egg question. Is it more important to have individuals leading and making data-led decisions making, or is it more important to improve the overall level of digital literacy? So I'll try and say that again. Is it more important to focus individuals and leaders looking at making data-led decisions, or is it more important for everyone to start building overall levels of digital literacy? And if we do have to do both of them at the same time, how do we work that in terms of priority and order? I think everyone's like, there's so much already to do in terms of digital transformation. How do we start?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I've also heard that one before. So in our work with Centre for Digital Built Britain, through our research, we identified the digital skills and skills for digital takes different split the more senior you get in an organisation. And we observed that leadership are required to have more of the skills for digital than digital skills. So yes, they'll need to be able to look at the latest dashboard and interpret it and then make a decision in their board meeting. But they don't need to have the techie, nitty-gritty kind of technical skills that a cybersecurity specialist or a data architect might need. So my response to the first one is that the split of skills at a leadership level is very different to the rest of the organisation. And in terms of building the digital literacy, I think that does need to happen hand in hand. And through the work we've done, we've identified that as being a priority as well as data-led decision making. So it's about developing without having too many changes going on in an organisation. That's firstly and foremostly really, really important to say, to prevent any change fatigue. It is really, really important to consider how you can make two changes at the same time, especially if they're behavioural changes. So you're asking groups of people to do things which they did very differently the previous week, because everyone's got an emotional attachment and habits that are extremely difficult to break. So it's a very iterative and slowly but surely approach to change both of those things. Basically, they won't happen overnight. That's probably the covering it from a research perspective, but I'm really keen to hear what the rest of the panelists have to say about that. I know I can see Amy grinning and shaking her head a lot.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was more looking at the questions coming David's way. But no, didn't have anything further to add on that. I think it's really interesting what skills you need as you go up the organisation, and definitely they shift, which we called out in the white paper. So especially for the person leading the change, or all change leaders need that ability to communicate the narrative of why, to have those adult conversations with people. I think that was one of the most striking ones. You can't just say we're going to do it like this and we're going to switch it off. You need to be able to face into those conversations. So I think you're completely right. The skills shift as they go up the levels.
I guess just one final thing to add there, which is the risk of losing knowledge. So if you kind of wrap all of your digital sort of like, really sort of optimize digital skills and knowledge and capability in a few individuals at the leadership level, if they leave, it creates a big vacuum. And so there is an argument that says by prioritizing the digital literacy across your whole organization, what you're effectively doing is building in resilience. I've seen it on lots of occasions where, the head of digital has moved on and suddenly the organization has to spend the next 2 years doing a new strategy because all of the thinking came from one person. It's just another sort of angle on that one.
I have a final point to add, which is if I go to the CDBB reports and on the business skills, on communications, one of the ones that we highlighted over there, what always struck me that came through in that one is the storytelling. Right, this is not about another PowerPoint presentation. Right, you almost like got to abandon that. What is the story that you want to tell? How do you engage people with the change? And so to have leaders who can communicate in a way where they're telling a compelling story that people relate to at an emotional level, we tend to still do things a lot through that project plan, because we need that, through that PowerPoint with the 7 bullet points, and we need that, and another framework and a timeline. But around that, you have to wrap it up with a really great story, and people relate to that.
Thank you, Tom. I think that's a great recommendation, going back to the kind of what's in it for me at the individual level. And I feel like we've probably got a lot of people on the call today that are probably thinking kind of what can they do next? And a lot of this is around sort of convincing senior management to invest in digital transformation. So David, I've got a question for you. Can you recommend any strategies or methods to convince senior management to invest in digital transformation?
Yeah, great question. I'm so glad you asked me. So I think it links to something that Tom was saying about conversations. So my first port of call would always be have a conversation with them. Make sure you understand their starting point, because sometimes it's because they actually don't understand it. And so make sure you spend the time to work with them to understand if they've got any resistance around digital, what is driving that. The second reason to go and actually speak to them and try and spend time with them is to understand their priorities. So it really worries me when we work with clients and they create a whole new set of metrics around digital, because all you're doing really is creating extra things to track. Like we see a lot more traction with digital transformation and convincing senior leaders where you're able to put it in terms of their strategic objectives that they already have in place. And those should be business objectives. So digital very much enables you to perform as a business. It shouldn't be viewed as this other thing that you need to be good at. It should be, right front and center in how you sort of measure yourself as a business. So yeah, how can you get that sort of buy-in. It comes down to commitment as well. So looking at what others do, looking at what other organizations that are similar, you know, through things like benchmarking, that can really create that sort of sense of, you know, we need to change, we need to be better than we are today, and we need to be as good as others. So that definitely helps. And then, yeah, so, and putting it in terms of, I guess, putting it across in terms that they understand and that resonate with them. So it comes back to understanding what their drivers are, putting across the need to transform digitally in terms of business terms. So whether that's cost reduction, efficiency, could be customer experience, whatever it is that's driving them and motivating them. And I would say what's worked really well for me is going to the annual report that every organization produces. And then they'll always set out, you know, here are the things we're trying to achieve in the next year, the objectives, the goals, they might call it different things. And if you can pin what you're trying to do from a digital transformation perspective to a couple of those things, that gives it a lot more weight. So that when you go back to that person and you say, you know, so-and-so, I've had a look through our strategy and I think we could actually deliver improvements against these 3 strategic objectives using this tool, that is a really powerful case for change there.
And how has that worked for you, Neil, at Sellafield? Sort of in relation, you know, what methods or sort of strategies have worked for you to convince senior management in digital transformation?
Yeah, I think two points. The first one would be bring it to life. And so, you know, back to the points from Tom and others earlier, you can create many presentations and many reports that says these are the things we want to do, but it's actually investing in some proof of concepts, proof of values to actually showcase what you're talking about and bring it to life in terms of the solution. That would be the first thing. And then the second one, you know, linked to the strategy piece. So we developed our digital strategy 12 months ago, and then we've just updated our enterprise strategy, and our digital strategy is fully embedded into our enterprise strategy now. So we've got that strong link between the value of the digital strategy and how that improves the enterprise strategy.
Thank you, Neil. And we've got another here from Elizabeth, directed to you, Neil, around sort of the areas of collaboration. So we know that building commitment and collaborating across an organisation is really, really important. Could you maybe expand on some of those examples around communication? We know that Amy sort of mentioned community of practices before, but it'd be great to get some real life examples from yourself as well.
Yeah, no problem. So it very aligned to what Amy talked about earlier. So, you know, 2 years ago when we embarked on, we set digital ambition, which we developed internally. We held a number of digital strat hack events to understand current state, future state gap, and to really engage the business on those. And then through the proof of concepts, proof of values, getting business sponsorship and collaborating on that to get that business value. And then externally, just one of the specific things that we do through the Digital Transformation Task Group, which is circa 15 infrastructure owner operators. We have star chambers, so people will develop a digital strategy or a data strategy or an improvement plan, and we hold star chambers where we collaborate as a community around common challenges and insights and benchmark and test individual organisations' approach. So it's really strong about collaboration as a group of industry owner operators.
Thank you, Neil. I think we have time for one more question, which I'd like to direct as a first point of call to Hannah, but everyone else kind of feel free to jump in at this one. And it's really focused on senior leadership and sort of company reach in terms of digital capability. So the question is, should we demand that the very senior leadership of a company reach a certificate level of digital capability? They're often of a certain generation and are not digitally aware, yet that they tell everyone else that we must transform. So should leaders be setting an example? And Hannah, how can they do this? You know, do they have to retrain as a data scientist, or what other skills could sort of help them become a sort of digital leader without sort of retraining and sort of specific digital competencies?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for sending that one in. So I'll make this answer quite short, but no, leader does not need to become a data scientist, for example, but we've done a load of research into the training courses, and training isn't the be all and end all, but it's always a starting point that exists out there for developing transformational leadership qualities. And there's a lot of training out there that is already used across other industries, which is totally applicable to our industry, which we should start using basically as a starting point. There's really good stuff out there. So that's a way to do training informally, and obviously coaching and mentoring and collaborating at a certain level across organisations is always recommended to basically upskill leaders. In terms of the qualifications, that's really interesting. In our industry, we see a lot of charterships, and there's a lot of emphasis placed on certain disciplines, engineering as an example. And we really need to place in the same amount of importance on the digital disciplines. And there are digital qualifications out there, but they're not used in anger in our industry yet, but we should start to do that. And there's definitely a call from a national perspective. The government needs to be involved in developing curriculums and kind of a yardstick for leaders in their position as well, I think, so that they've got the right level of capability.
Thank you, Hannah. That was a really concise but packed full of information question answered in such a short space of time. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, and thank you for your questions. There are still some more in the Q&A. We will try our best to get back to you and answering those questions, and also send out some additional information, including the white paper and the Centre for Digital Built Britain Skills and Competency Framework. But thank you very much for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your sunny Tuesday. Thank you, everyone. Take care.